It's Matt. I'm here for Aaron Public Library, doing a video showing you how to make a pumpkin pie. It's a very easy one to impress folks with the holidays. I'm getting this recipe from the Betty Crocker cookbook. This one's the bridal edition. Kat and I got it for our wedding many years ago. If you remember the apple pie, I had told you to make the filling first, then the pie crust. This one is going to be the opposite. We have to bake the crust first, and then put the filling in it, and then bake the whole pie. So we'll do the crust first here. It's going to be the same crust, just a smaller version from the apple pie. So it's 1 cup of flour, and then half a teaspoon of salt. Salt makes everything taste good. Alright, and then shortening. I'm using just whatever cheap brand of shortening. Some people are pretty critical of what fat they use in their crust. I think shortening is the way to go. It asks for 1/3 cup plus 1 tablespoon. I measure it pretty sloppy. Having some extra shortening in there just makes it easier to work with and keeps your crust nice and flaky. And just like apple pie, flaky is the name of the game. We want to keep it from being tough. We don't want to get that gluten built up in there. So we're going to do that, and then we're going to take our pastry cutter. This is probably the only tool that is not very common, but usually people have it. It does save a lot of time. If you don't have that, you can take 2 butter knives and just cross repeatedly. Just keep on crossing, but that will take a long time. So just take your pastry cutter and then turn it in like that. Get the bits off of there. So essentially what you're trying to do is make a crumbly texture in here. If you notice, I don't have my rattly bowl this time. Realized that way too late. After last video. Alright, so I'm cutting this in. And it does take a couple minutes. But yeah, so it's getting to be a good texture there. You can kind of squish it together. But yeah, you want to keep cutting it till it's nice and even texture and crummy. Again, you want to make sure your parents know you're doing this because you got to operate the oven. There's no real sharp tools involved in this part, but it's always good that your parents know you're cooking so they don't, come home to a surprise mess. Now, an important rule to know about pie is it's not hard to impress folks with it. It does not have to be a perfect pie. It doesn't have to be the greatest pie you've ever seen. Pumpkin pie, you want to try and avoid a cracked top, but it doesn't matter. If the top ends up cracked, people will still eat it. People will still love it because pie is pie, man. There's a lot to love there. Alright, so I think that's good enough there. You can kind of see where it sticks together a little bit. So yeah, we'll take our water here. So this is 2 to 3 tablespoons of water. I have substituted it with vodka. It has to be cold water or make sure you talk to your parents before you do that. The reason I use the vodka is so I can put more liquid in without building that gluten and making it tough, which again is the name of the game. So I'm gonna sprinkle our water on here. We'll probably give it 2 tablespoons here to start with, and you don't want to just dump it in. You want to do it gradually, and we'll flip. We're just flipping the crust like this. You see how it's kind of clumping together already? That's good. That's the name of the game right there. Alright. I probably should have mentioned earlier, you want to have your oven started preheating. Alright, mine is going to the 425 degrees. So we just want to get that started because we're going to bake this crust while we make the rest of the pie filling. I think that's stirred in there. So the vodka trick in here is kind of a cheat. You know, it's just kind of a way to make your life a little bit easier. Some people will comment on it. It doesn't matter. I mean, it really, like, as far as whether you cheat, the fact is whatever method gets you a successful pie, that's the method you should use. So I'm getting that in there. You can see it's really kind of clumping up in there, and that's good. We like that. All right, so that's pretty wet. So this is a pretty wet dough from what you typically have. If you're using just straight water, I don't recommend having your dough this wet because your crust will come out like shoe leather, and people will have to saw through it with their forks. And don't get me wrong, they'll still eat it happily, but you know, it's that point of pride of having a nice tender crust. So this is a pastry cloth. It does make life a bit easier. When I was a kid, I used to use dish towels for this, and that did the job just fine. And I also have a cloth that covers my rolling pin here. And this helps flour stick to the cloth better, to the rolling pin better, so you don't have to worry about constantly applying flour to the pin and, you know, drying out your dough with too much flour. Go in there. I probably should have ironed out my pastry cloth, but I think it'll be just fine. So you're going to take your dough and kind of make it into a little smudge in the corner there. Smoosh it all into the corner. There you go. And then kind of make it into a hockey puck here. I'm going to make it as round as we can. And squish, squish, squish it all together. The more squished together it is, the less it's going to be all craggy when you roll it out. So here we go. I'm going to roll this out. Roll. Beep means my oven is preheated, so that's good. And then for this recipe, the flour we used was just all-purpose flour. It does not need to be any special kind of flour at all. So that's holding together nice. So we're going to use the same method we used last time to transfer it because that worked out so nice. So I'm going to take the dough and roll it up on the pin here, and then set it down. I'm going to roll it off onto the plate. And that worked out. Yay! Yay for Matt. Matt's the greatest. So yeah, we're squishing this in. So this pie does not get a top crust. It is just this crust. That is the only part of it. So we're going to squish this one on. There's no extra need for any of the extra crust you might end up with. So we are going to... And then I'm just going to take my knife and trim off the excess here. Alright, there's a little low on this bit, so I'm going to squish that crust in there. Alright, so that came out really nice. That was probably my best transfer I've ever done. So that I'm pretty proud of. Alright, so I'm going to take this and we're going to bake it for a little bit. Probably, I got to look it up, I think about 10 minutes. It doesn't take long. Yeah, and then we'll pull that out. And while we're baking this, I'll make the rest of the inside. Just in case you don't want to go to the store, if you want to impress all your friends by using an actual pumpkin to do your pumpkin pie, I'm just going to show you the quick way to make the puree, and this is the first step. So we need to carve it into wedges and then bake it, and then after it's baked, then you scoop it out and puree it. So we'll get started on that. So I like to remove the stem first. Kind of actually not unlike making a jack-o'-lantern, except it's easier to clean out because we're wedging it. We don't need to keep, you know, any particular pumpkin shape in it. You can also use a serrated knife if you want. I don't have any serrated knives, so this is the knife I'm using. And then actually, occasionally I'll cheat and use a drywall saw, which is fun. That actually does a really good job getting through pumpkins. Line that up. This whole thing should just pop off. And really all we're trying to do is get the thing out of the way. If you want to keep the seeds, you can keep the seeds. I'm not really a seed person, but some people are. And then we just wedge out the pumpkin. So essentially cutting it in half. I cut it in quarters. You can cut it in whatever amount you want, obviously. The important thing is that it just gets baked. So we got that. Here, chop it down into quarters. It does occasionally take a little bit of muscle. And then, yeah, I like to cut this stuff free because obviously we don't really want to use the stemmy parts anyway. And then if you give a little cut on the bottom and on the top of the, you know, where all the seeds are, that can make it a lot easier to scoop all that business out. And we just scoop out with a spoon. So I'll clean the rest of those later. But what I want to start with is just showing you how to get this on. So you want to bake it for about 350 degrees. Usually ends up being about half an hour. And the only thing you really need to do after it's cut to prep it is take just regular vegetable oil. You can really use any oil. What's important is the fat makes it easier to transfer heat into what you're cooking. And that's what we're doing here. I'm sure there's some more scientific thing that I'm completely glazing over, but yeah. So yeah, just brushing that on, and it doesn't have to be thick. You don't want it dripping off of there. Just get it brushed on. And then I brush it on the backside, even though we're not eating the backside, it's gonna just get scraped off. But again, it does help transfer that heat, so it'll help cook through the bottom as well. And then you just stack them in a container. And then, yeah, again, oven about 350 degrees. And then I'll show you later before I take them out, what you want to do is you want to put a fork in it, just like with a potato. Put a fork in it, and if it pulls out with no resistance, then your pumpkin is good. Because we got to mash it and everything, and we don't want that to be more difficult later. Alright, so this is the pumpkin after it's been baked. I just kind of stabbed it with a fork and it slipped out pretty easily. Some are a little closer to done than others, and I might just throw them in the oven a bit more. But yeah, right now we're just letting it cool because the next step is that we have to scrape out all the pumpkin and put it in a food processor, which obviously hot would be very uncomfortable. Alright, so I got this is sufficiently cooled. It's out of the oven. And then what we're going to do now is we're going to puree it. I use a food processor. If someone has a better tool for this, I would love to know about it. But yeah, so essentially just taking the skin off. I use a big old spoon for this as well because it seems to work the best for me. And you know, whatever tool works for you is good. So whatever you want to use, but when we were talking about pumpkins before, these are pie pumpkins that I just got from Piggly Wiggly. I've used a bunch of different pumpkins before. I've used like full-on jack-o'-lanterns before, and it all works just fine. It's really a matter of preference. If you get a chance to get some of the fancier ones, like there are some really warty pumpkins that you can get that are really tasty, but those are harder to get. Um, I'm just jamming this thing in here. And you just need to put a whole bunch in there for this thing to work. It's got to kind of be flooded with stuff. It's always kind of a pain in the butt getting this thing to start grinding everything up. You got to get it to sufficiently pureed where it starts to flow and push itself around, which takes a minute. You can also use a blender. So there we go. So you just want to make sure you don't have any chunks in here. Spoon out what's ground up. And once you got a good liquidy base of stuff in here, it gets a lot easier to grind up. Alright guys, so I took the pie crust out of the oven. It was in there for 8 to 10 minutes. And so it's partially cooked through here. You can see it shrunk up a bit, and some parts are puffy. You can use they call it a weight. You just put aluminum foil in, and then I put black beans on top of it just to hold the crust down while it's baking. I did not do that this time, but it came out pretty well. Alright, so as far as the filling actually isn't difficult. So you start with 2 eggs. That goes in there. And then you're supposed to beat these up. Start getting them pretty well beaten up with a wire whisk. You know, make sure your parents know you're doing this, because raw eggs left around can make folks sick. So in the directions here it says to beat the eggs and then just beat in the rest of the ingredients. So this is 1/2 cup of sugar, just plain white granulated sugar. Mix that up. And then, so pumpkin spice. You probably hear everybody talking about pumpkin spice this time of year. It really isn't pumpkin, it's the spices that go into pumpkin. So it's a smidge of salt, some cinnamon, and then cloves and ground ginger. So you can see, so those are the spices there. And those just get slid into here. And then you mix that up. That's some pretty spicy stuff going on there. So this is just a big bundle of egg and sugar and spices. And then here's the pumpkin. Now this is a puree I made myself. You remember if you watched the apple pie video, I said that you have to make your apple pies and stuff. I don't think that's the case with pumpkin. You can get out of a can, and the stuff out of a can is essentially just the same thing. So this is 2 cups of pumpkin puree. So, but it's up to you whether or not you want to do that. Otherwise, the stuff out of the can is just as good. So mixing this in. And then a 12 ounces, 1 can, 12-ounce can of evaporated milk. You want to make sure to shake up the can before you do this. I shook it up while I was getting ready because there's some schmutz at the bottom that you definitely want to get in here. Alright, and then you just kind of gently mix all this together. Now this is your pumpkin pie filling. You know, that's pretty much the whole thing. The eggs are gonna, you know, be what helps it firm up in there, and then that meat of the pumpkin and those spices are really gonna bring a lot of flavor through. And of course that half cup of sugar is going to help a lot, because yeah, what is pie but just another carriage for sugar? So now here is the expert part of the whole business. Pouring it in here and then transporting it to the oven without spilling it all over yourself, your oven, or your pan. I would say that I have tips on how to do that, but that would imply that I've ever successfully done it. So we're going to give it another shot today. But yeah, so we're just going to pour this in. It is very thin. So if you see it being this thin, don't worry, you didn't do anything wrong. It's just how it is. Now Betty Crocker says to put foil around the edges of your pan, of your crust, to prevent over browning, which again is something I did not do. But I think that it came out. So this pretty much just fills up the whole thing. And then next we put it in the oven. So that's 425 degrees still. And then we're baking it for 45 minutes, for about an hour total. So if you use the foil around the outside, you bake it for about 15 minutes, then you pull the foil off, and then you bake it for an additional 45. So it's going to bake for about an hour. Okay, so it's been baking for an hour. As you can see, I overfilled it, which is like my trademark. So we're going to check it and see where we're at here. So I'm going to take a skewer, poke it into the center, and it came out pretty clean. So I think it's ready to come out. Alright, so here's the completed pie. Yeah, you can see it overflowed and went down in on the other side of the crust, so that's going to be problematic, but yeah, overall it's how it comes out.